Greetings, humans. It's social psychology time. We're delving into chapter 9 on aggression. So let's start off with a simple definition. Aggression is an attempt to harm a person who does not wish to be harmed. Arguably, if they wish to be harmed, you're not harming them. So we're stuck with the attempt to harm the person. Intent matters. It has to be an intentional attempt to count as aggression. So you're walking through the hallway, you're not paying attention, you bump someone with your shoulder, you didn't mean to, that is not an aggressive action. You do mean to, you're shoulder bumping to show your manhood in the hallway, well, now that's aggression. Levels of intent matter, and we get different levels of crime based on levels of intent. Did you mean to do the thing that you did? But you can still be found culpable for harm even if you did not intend to do that harm. It can be neglect, for example, or criminal incompetence. So for example, murder 1, 2, and 3. I watched a lot of Law and Order in the 2000s. Murder 1, the planned intentional homicide. We can show evidence, malice aforethought. That is, you planned out the whole thing. You had a plan, you had an escape plan, you had a mitigation plan. Uh, uh, you did it on purpose. You did it with full intent. That's murder 1, most severe penalties. Murder 2, though, that's where you walk in on your lover having sex with somebody else, and in a fit of passion, you grab the shotgun and do what you feel needs to be done in the moment. You didn't plan it. You didn't set that up in advance. You didn't have escape plans and alibis and so forth thought out. There was no malice aforethought. So that's murder 2, and you're still going to jail. But you're not going to jail for as long as murder 1. But there's also murder 3, which is criminally indifferent homicide. This is neglect that leads to death. There's somebody hanging from a ledge and you could save them and you just watch them fall. You're culpable for not trying to render aid in that situation. Someone floating by in the river screaming for help, you just wave and watch them go. That, if I'm not wrong, that's Meursault in The Stranger. You're culpable. You're culpable for that. Criminally indifferent homicide. You're making a product, and you know that the product has the potential to do harm to people, and you put it on the market anyway. Someone dies. Criminally indifferent homicide. Homicide 3. So we need to know about intent, right? When we're judging people's actions, we need to know whether they intended those actions to lead to harm, or they knew that they could lead to harm and still went ahead, or if they had no idea they'd lead to harm. That can be actually really difficult to determine. And for a scientist, it's hardest of all. Like people, average people are just fine going around attributing motivations to people. But for a scientist, we can really never have sufficient evidence to fully make attributions. We're somewhat stuck with people's testimony about what they say they were thinking at the time, but even that is often quite unclear, right? Remember, people are lying liars who lie, and it's not always the researcher that they're lying to. Often we're just poor witnesses of our own experiences. So these definitions of aggression, you as a human might use aggressive to describe some behaviors or some activities that the social scientist is going to say, well, that's merely assertive, because they don't mean to harm the other person. They're just, I don't know, trying to win the football game. Do you play football very aggressively? I don't know. Do you intend to harm somebody? Or do you merely intend to get the ball to the 5-yard line, or whatever is happening in the game of football? I don't really know. Right, so there's that. So lawyer ads. I've heard a local lawyer describe themselves as aggressive in experience, and I typed it into Google expecting to be led to that specific ad for a Colorado Springs lawyer. No, I was led to pages and pages and pages of ads for lawyers. Lawyers describe themselves as aggressive and experienced. But do they intend to harm their legal opponent? No, they intend to get the best possible results for you and therefore for themselves. That's not aggressive. It's assertive, and it's like way out there in terms of assertiveness. You want the most assertive possible lawyer, but in lay terms, absolutely, they're very aggressive. They're very case forward. Um, so special cases of violence, special cases of aggression, rather, violence being one of those. So here we have aggression with extent to cause extreme physical harm. And the word extreme, that can throw in some ambiguity into the stuff. Like what you would think was extreme might not be what I think was extreme. We've been in different backgrounds. I might be relatively more inured to violence than you. Or it's conceivable you're slightly more inured to violence than I am because you've been in worse places. Um, but unlikely. Then you can get emotional, impulsive, or reactive aggression. So we're back to here, like trying to figure out levels of intent on this one. So reactive aggression comes from the unpleasant or sometimes called negative emotions. I don't like the term negative emotions. Negative in science implies absence, right? And anger is definitely a positive emotion. It's definitely there. It's fully additive. It's just that we don't like it. Okay. So I'm gonna try and stick to the term unpleasant rather than negative. Anger and fear. Anger and fear really drive aggression, and even sometimes violence. So anger and fear, they're processed in the amygdala, or as I like to say to remember it better, Amy G. Dala. Amy G is the girlfriend from the 90s that every 90s comedian was complaining about, and she's always angry and scared. So emotional violence or impulsive violence, it's minimally contemplated. That is, we don't plan it out in advance. It's just that we hit a situation, we exceed the capacity of the frontal lobe to tamp down our aggressive impulses, and we behave impulsively. We snap. Okay. Good. And then the opposite of that would be instrumental aggression. And we could also call that, if you like, cognitive aggression, because it is planful. We plan it out in advance. And like the other aspect, the other component of instrumental aggression is it's goal directed. We're doing that for a reason to get something. The satisfaction of hurting somebody might be all that we intend to get, but usually that aggression is intended to get something bigger. Okay? So to the extent that you could say lawyers are aggressive, that they do mean to, say, demean and discredit a witness, you could make a case, if you're a lawyer, that that is aggression. But it would not at all be emotional aggression, right? They don't care about that person at all. They have no hard feelings. They're not rankling. But it would absolutely be instrumental that the goal of discrediting a witness is so that your client gets the best result that they can get. Okay, and aggression could be physical or it could be non-physical. Examples of non-violent but physical aggression: hitting, poking, slapping. Yeah, tickling. When you're tickling your kid and they're laughing their heads off but saying stop and you keep doing that. Is that aggression? Is it aggression? Do you intend harm? When they say stop and you keep going, it might be that you do. All this stuff: stabbing, shooting, sexual violence, maiming. These are violent and physical. And then aggressive, but non-physical and non-violent, that would be in the realm of name calling, doxing. That's when someone has an anonymous internet identity and you out that internet identity. Yeah, so you go on the white power message boards and you find out people's screen names and you correlate those with real names and you put that out in public so that they can be harassed IRL. That would be doxing. Don't do that. Outing, that's when you know someone's gay, but they're not open about it, and you gather evidence and you out them in public. You make it obvious and with evidence that that's a gay person. Gossiping, telling stories behind people's backs about them. All that stuff is aggressive, but it's non-physical, it's non-violent. Okay. Terrorism. Terrorism, a special case of instrumental aggression. That is, we're out in public, we're doing harm, we're doing it on purpose. The point of terrorism usually, though, is not merely to harm people. It's to get something. So harm is accepted. It's accepted as necessary, necessary and sometimes sufficient, but the harm itself is not usually the goal of terrorism. The goal of terrorism is to free political captives or gain territory or make money or crash an economy or something. So the goal is usually some benefit to the self or to some in-group, of religious terrorism, majority, minority terrorism, white power groups, okay? How does it work? It works by focusing attention, and often disproportionately focusing on attention, so that we're spending all our time worried about a thing that actually isn't that likely ever to happen. We're spending all our cognitive energy now dealing with this issue. Now you're focused on the issue I want you to be focused on. Okay. So there's kind of a movement in America to label mass shooters as domestic terrorists. And is that what's happening? Well, sometimes yes, and sometimes no. Like a blanket declaration that all mass shooters would be domestic terrorists, that would probably be inappropriate. At least for the scientist. I mean, as a political speech, do what you want. But for a scientist, we might have an issue because it's not going to always meet our definition. So sometimes there are goals, right? The guy who shot up the black church in South Carolina, he had a white power goal in mind. Was it a realistic goal? Is that a goal that's going to be met by murdering people in church? No, absolutely not. But it is a goal. And deluded and stupid people can still have goals. But often, if there's a goal, the goal is the suffering. It's just about taking these horrible feelings that are inside, can't be described, or if you describe them, no one's really listening. They mock and they just call you names and stuff. Take that and externalize it so other people feel that, and now everyone's suffering as much as you. Is that a terroristic goal? Is that instrumental? Are you really getting something material from that? It's hard to say clearly that would be a terrorist goal. So there's no agenda here except the suffering, that the suffering of others is the goal of the behavior, and harm absolutely is intended. That's what it's supposed to do. So here, it's not that we're merely accepting that some people have to die to get something done. It's that we want people to die. Okay. And we want people to suffer and grieve and cry out. And is there fame in it? Yeah, sometimes there is. So that might be a goal. I want everyone to know my name before I die. It's not a political goal, but that's not really required for terrorism in the social science definition. So ambiguity, right? Ambiguity here. Is it not? You could make a case. It does make everyone scared of extremely unlikely events. School is the safest place on earth for children. American schools are the safest place on earth for children. It's far more dangerous for children to be home because their parents, have not gone through background checks, and you're not educated on how to deal with children, and your home doesn't have to meet occupational safety and health administration requirements, and it doesn't have to be ADA compliant, and There's not janitors coming through disinfecting all the surfaces periodically, right? Most accidents happen at home. Very few accidents happen at school, and very few lethalities compared to the number of people in school. How many schools are there? Just K through 12. There's 250,000 schools in America. And maybe 2 or 3 times a year, someone does a mass shooting in schools. And a few people die. Compared to the number of people in the schools, it's absolutely minuscule. So you're really, really worried about really, really unlikely events, in fact. So mass shooters have more in common with suicide epidemics than they really do with terrorism. Like, the more we cover mass shooters, the more they know they can get famous by doing this horrible thing, and the more it's top of mind, and the more it seems like a solution to their problems. So if you really want to solve the mass shooting epidemic, you need to stop covering it in the news with like 24-hour coverage for 2 weeks and the shooter's face on the news and making him famous. Just disappear him. Act like they never happened. Why else should you do that? Well, you should do it because it takes away the motivation. If we don't know about it, then we're not scared of it. And there's no reason really to be scared of it because it's one of the least likely things that is ever going to happen. Okay. Aggression. So are mass shootings terrorism or not? I don't know. It's a thing that I want you to look at on a case-by-case basis and see, does it meet all the requirements for being terrorism? Is it instrumental? Are we getting something out of it? Is harm the only goal, or is it just a way to get the thing that we're trying to get? Who benefits? Who benefits from this? Okay. EvoPsych. If you've been around me for very long, you know that we need to be super careful with evolutionary psychology, okay? So evolution, yeah, basically the truest thing that we can say. We can never make 100% confident declarations of truth. But evolution, it's about as close as it gets, all right? EvoPsych, though, the problem is that the assertions of evolutionary psychology are often untestable. That is, they're not in principle falsifiable. Okay, it's like Flying Spaghetti Monster, Aesop's fables, Just So stories. We often can't go back and check out. Behavior doesn't leave a fossil record, okay? Bones leave a fossil record. DNA even leaves a historical record that can be analyzed. Behavior, usually a few things like pyramids, and those are only a few thousand years old, and we argue about what those are and what they mean. So EvoPsych is going to say aggression's innate. If you say aggression is innate, then that absolutely accords with the principles of evolutionary psychology. We're born with it. It serves functions. The most aggressive males tend to get the breeding privileges, pass on the trait of aggressiveness. Okay, cool. We buy it. We're there. And just look around the so-called animal kingdom, and you'll see all sorts of evidence for aggression, and aggression getting organisms what they want: access to resources, safety for their clans and families and offspring and all that stuff. The issue is that, remember Dunning-Kruger, right? The tendency to think you know more than you know. And it's easy to see how aggression would have evolutionary components. But when you know more about evolution, then you start to say, yeah, but aggression is also costly. Okay? It has all these various costs. Number one, it reduces cooperation. Humans are a relatively weak species. We're pasty and gray, and white people can't even tolerate sunlight, and mosquitoes, never mind bears and wolves and crap. We're not good competitors in the solitary. We absolutely require cooperation to get any work done, to build things, to have material culture, to have good ideas. And the more we aggress, the more we reduce cooperation, right? So if I'm the dictator and I'm the strong man and always telling people what to do, there's always another guy right behind me gunning for my position, right? And I'll get some level of cooperation as long as I'm looking and driving them forward with my big stick. But the second I turn my back, that's all over. It puts the self and group at risk. So chimpanzees, they go to war and they commit genocide, but it's not like all this clan chimpanzees line up on this side and all this clan's chimpanzees line up on that side and they go at each other until one side's totally dead. No, they pick each other off. They do it in the safest way possible. So if 5 chimpanzees catch one enemy chimpanzee alone, they tear it to pieces. But if they see 2, they just back away. They'll front and they'll scare them off and then back away and wait until they get 1. Because if they can get 1 alone, 5 on 1 is good odds, and you can tear that guy to pieces without worrying about sustaining any casualties. Even predators minimize their risk. Okay? Aggression is risky. And if we're living in a violent society where I'm related to at least some of the members of society, and I can't tell really which members, then whoever I'm aggressing against might share some of my genes, and that's bad. That's bad. We get the peace dividend. The more we are trading and cooperating, the better everything is. The more I'm aggressing, the more resources I'm putting into that aggression, putting into war and defense, and that's bad for society, and I share genes with many members of society, okay? It takes up time and energy that is better spent gathering stones together. I could be planting fields and watching over them, and we could be running a rotation to watch over the herds of cattle to make sure that animals or enemies don't come take them. If I'm fighting you, then I can't look after the fields, I can't look after the herds. I have more people devoted to soldiering and less people devoted to innovation. Okay, it's a waste. It's a waste of energy and resources and time, and it's risky, and people get hurt. Look, humans aren't even predators. The idea of the alpha male and the 2 eyes that face forward and we should be eating meat, humans are not predators. We're terrible predators. We're not adapted for that. We can do it, and we can do it probably largely out of coincidence. But we're relatively weak compared to other kinds of animals. It takes a lot of technological innovation for humans to safely hunt things like bison and elephants. Innovation and teamwork and really desperation. Like, we probably got the things that enable us to do that by scavenging. Other predators would kill things and we'd find the bones. We have to walk a long way to do it, so we get these upright postures to see over the grass and stay safe, and big bottoms that help us to run, and all these adaptations really don't seem to be about hunting, because we're not great hunters, again, without a bunch of teamwork, cooperation, and technology. So you could hunt, you could chase a deer, right? You can exhaustion hunt a deer. You maybe not, me certainly not, but a human can run for such a long time, and really exchange heat with the environment, dissipate heat so that we don't get exhausted, and run a deer to exhaustion so that it can't go any further, and then jump on it and stab it. But that deer still has tricks. It's still relatively stronger than you, pound for pound, has natural weaponry. And when you jump on it and try and strangle it with your bare hands, you're out. You're out. People don't have any natural weaponry. Our fingernails are not claws, despite the name of the TV show. We retain this bit of backing right here, mostly so that we can pick up thin objects like keys or coins. You can get those from the desk without the end of your finger being very floppy. Like, these are for fine manipulation of objects, not for slashing out eyes. Could you do it? Oh yeah, you could, I guess, but other animals can do it a lot better, right? We don't have natural weaponry. What about teeth? We have teeth, but they're not very big compared to the size of our jaws or our heads. We don't have any facial prognathism, which means that your snoot doesn't point out, doesn't stretch out from your face. That means that your teeth are in line with your face, and in order to bite something, you're going to smack your face into it. That's no good. Humans are not predators. All right. So like feeding behaviors, aggressive feeding behaviors, hunting and stuff, that's just not really part of the human DNA. We can do it, and some people enjoy it, but it's not really natural to us. Okay. So that's evopsych. Aggression, absolutely, it's innate. You can get advantages with aggression, but it also is costly. And so it's not like we're programmed to always be aggressive. It's that we have the potential to be aggressive, and then there's all these impediments to aggression, so that aggression will only surface when it really seems necessary, when there aren't any other options. Okay. What about genes? There are weak genetic links to aggression. The warrior gene, the so-called warrior gene. People in prison for violent crimes have slightly higher incidence of this particular gene than people in the general population. Does that mean everyone who does a violent crime has it? No. Does it mean no one who doesn't do a violent crime has it? No, it doesn't mean that. It's a weak link, statistically significant, but still relatively weak. Situations are much more significant than genetics as far as this goes. Okay, and if you want a gene, I mean, the biggest gene of all, the Y chromosome, man. Violence seems to be largely the domain of male type humans. Yeah, women can be violent, but fewer than 10% of violent crimes are committed by women. Substantially more than 90% of violent crimes are in the male sphere, and some of that is social, and some of that's psychological, and some of it's sociological. But the Y chromosome is the best correlated bit of genetic material with violence. Testosterone. So the Y chromosome gives you the heavy testosterone load, and now we're talking hormones. Testosterone, and I think they implicate serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter, not a hormone. So a certain amount of testosterone correlates well with aggressive. Bear in mind, women also have testosterone, and testosterone, it seems like you need to have it to be aggressive, but changing the levels doesn't really have much of an impact on aggressiveness. And further, aggression causes testosterone just as much as testosterone causes aggression. That's complicated. Let me sip tea and we'll talk more about it. Got to keep the mouth parts wet. So what are we going to do? We're going to have a boxing match, okay? We're going to have a dude in blue shorts and a dude in red shorts, and they're trained boxers. They know what to do. But I'm going to have a tube in the vein in their foot, right by their ankle, so that over time I'm gathering small samples of blood and putting them in vials and labeling them minute by minute. And I'm going to have them fight. So as they're fighting, we can correlate the testosterone content of their blood with the fight on videotape, because it's 1990 or something, okay? And initially, the winner of a boxing match, everything else being equal, weight and skill and so forth being equal, the winner of the boxing match is going to be who's the most aggressive, who comes out and throws the most punches and is the least defensive. You spend the least time, you waste the least energy covering your face, you spend the most time on body blows and face blows. Okay, so testosterone correlates to that. The dude with the higher testosterone level is going to be the most aggressive and is going to start to win. All right, so far so good. Testosterone causes aggression. Wonderful. Wait a second. Because dude in the red shorts, he's the most aggressive, and he starts to win. He comes out, he throws the most punches, the other guy backs away the most, he takes the most punches. Red shorts testosterone rises over the course of the fight. And blue shorts guy testosterone decreases over the course of the fight. And the more red shorts is winning and the higher his testosterone goes, the more aggressive he is. And the more blue shorts is losing, the lower his testosterone goes, and the more he demonstrates submissive behaviors, less aggressive behavior. He stops fighting and just starts covering himself and absorbing blows. Cause and effect is really, really difficult to nail down here. It's very difficult to nail down. It's hard to experiment on humans. Like, I wouldn't want to put boxers up there and then manipulate their testosterone level. We'd have some sticky ethical problems. We can do it with rats. And it turns out that when you remove all testosterone from rats, they still aggress. They aggress less. It's more situational, but they do still aggress. And when you give them their testosterone back, they aggress more. But when you give them 2 or 3 or 4 times their testosterone back, they don't really aggress much more than baseline. Aggression causes testosterone just as much as testosterone causes aggression. So you have to look at the biopsychosocial factors that would make the Y chromosome such a risk for violence. All right, you have to put it all together. What about neurology? It's a social psych class. Why are we talking about neurology, brains and genes and stuff? Oh my God. We're gonna have some tension, and it's gonna match up a little bit up here. That aggression is innate to people, but it's old. It's in the limbic system, the part of the brain that first evolved, the limbic system. So it's there, but it's also costly, and it's mitigated by the frontal lobes. Okay, so AMG, the amygdala, produces aggression, fear and anger. They want to break out and hulk out and smash and dominate. But the frontal lobes are up there deciding between good and bad behavior, and they're putting the brakes on, they're damping down on the aggression and violence that your lower brain wants to enact. Remember, the brain, you're not born with your adult brain. Your brain encodes experience. So your life experiences absolutely matter in your ability to regulate aggression. Do you come from a society where aggression is relatively tolerated and encouraged? Well, then your frontal lobe's not going to really be there when amygdala is saying, hey, let's punch something. But if you're in a society where we teach a lot of restraint and value that restraint, then you're going to have relatively thick frontal lobes that are relatively capable of damping down on that, damping down that aggression. Are we hardwired for aggression? Hardwired, that's a mechanical term, and humans are not machines at all. That term, it grates on me. I don't like it. Overspecified is a much better word. That is, you're predisposed but not predetermined. Your brain encodes experience. You as a person learn from experience, and you do what's appropriate to the situations as far as you can determine. So there's always going to be this tension between cooperation and aggression, all right? And that tension can resolve one way or the other, but it's usually almost always going to resolve in the direction of cooperation. Special circumstances can put the limbic system in charge. So let's have a look at some of those circumstances. Alcohol. We call alcohol a depressant. That doesn't mean that drinking alcohol necessarily makes you depressed. It means that alcohol slows down neural firing, and it slows down that neural firing first in the frontal lobe. Now, when you inhibit the inhibitory complex, you get disinhibition. So alcohol, at least initially, is disinhibiting. All right, alcohol inhibits the frontal lobes first and produces disinhibition. That puts Amy G. Dalla in charge, doesn't it? So when the frontal lobe goes to sleep, the rest of the brain is free to play. The id is out of the cage because the superego is taking the night off. Well, if Amy G. Dalla naturally has some aggressive or violent inclinations, the drunker people are, the more predisposed they're going to be to violence. I hope that makes sense to people. Frustration. Frustration is where Amy G lives, right? That's what Amy G is for. Amy G processes frustration. So the frontal lobes can only do so much. And if this is a push and pull contest, and Amy is getting really, really psyched up, but the frontal lobe isn't, then eventually the amygdala is going to overpower the frontal lobe's ability to hold it in check. Sometimes aggression wins. Ice cream sales correlate to the homicide rate. We go from city to city and year to year and look at how much ice cream people are eating and how much people are stabbing each other or shooting each other and so on. And there's actually a pretty good correlation. Why would that be? Well, remember science rule 1. Are we saying that ice cream causes homicide? Right? We should stop selling ice cream because the more ice cream people eat, the more they murder each other. No. What else correlates to both of these things? It's the heat. The hotter the temperatures in a city, the more frustrated people are. You're spending all of your frontal lobe energy, let's say, all of that bandwidth on processing the fact that it's too hot to function and functioning anyway. So then when real frustrations come along, poverty or someone pushing you or noise in the street or someone bugging you, getting in your face, you don't have much bandwidth left to damp down on the aggression and the violence that Amy G already wants to do. And when you're hot, you're also buying ice cream. Get it? So ice cream sales correlate with the homicide rate because heat causes homicide and ice cream sales. Catharsis. Does watching violent television dissipate your violent urges? Does it get it out of your system? Does going to the gym and putting your boss's face on the punching bag and symbolically smacking them for an hour and a half, does that help? Spoiler alert, no. Sorry. Catharsis is not useful. When you're really angry or really scared, dwelling on the reasons for your fear on anger is just not helpful. It maintains the emotion. It eventually exhausts you, but it keeps it top of mind, and that's not useful. Physical activity helps. You want to burn off the adrenaline and the cortisol that fear and anger produce. Think of them like dumping fuel in an engine, You don't want to rev the engine and keep your foot on the brakes. You eventually want to let that sports car go. So, go to the gym. And yeah, if boxing's your thing, beat up on the punch bag. But don't tape your boss's face on it. Don't ruminate. Don't spend your time thinking about the causes of your problems. Think about doing the exercise. Rumination and perseveration, they kind of mean the same thing. And they're not good for us. They maintain the anger and ultimately lead to more aggression. So you show up to work in the morning, you're not less likely to aggress against your boss, you're more likely to. That's going to cause you more problems. Okay. So that's part 1, sort of the introduction to aggression, some of the biofactors. Take a break, drink some coffee or something, and we're going to start part 2 here. Sociological factors. What's happening situationally around aggression? Reward, yeah, that matters. So if you're really aggressive and being aggressive gets you what you want, then you're going to keep doing it. The more you reward a behavior, the more you expect to see that behavior. And that's obvious, right? The brain encodes experience. There's always the tension between the frontal lobes and the limbic system. And if you're telling the frontal lobes don't bother inhibiting this aggression, they won't bother inhibiting the aggression. It requires a lot of training to produce frontal lobe inhibition. It requires a broadly liberal society where we value human life and we reward behaviors other than aggression. We reward cooperation. And in the absence of those conditions, we don't build frontal lobes that inhibit aggression. What about modeling? Monkey see, monkey do. Humans, children in particular, practice specific behaviors and roles that are built from behaviors. So the more that you think that men are aggressive, the more that being a man, you are aggressive. The more that you think that women are not aggressive, the more that being a woman, you're passive and accommodating. So you sort of identify what type of person you are, and you find role models in the environment to teach you how to be that type of person. If you're destined for a career in psychology, you should find some psychologists you admire, watch their behavior, and model, use them as role models, right? Take what's good and leave the rest, though. Take what's good and leave the rest. Be thoughtful about it. Humans don't really have any instincts. By instincts, of course, we mean complex inborn behaviors. Horses instinctually know how to run. They can run within a few hours of being born. No one has to teach them. Humans can't even ambulate without models. We have to teach them how to do it. Weaver birds know how to build the weaver bird nest from long grasses, but humans are adaptable. That is, that we could exist in any number of circumstances which are not predictable at the time of conception. We have to be able to learn almost any language and build various structures and operate different kinds of machinery and do all sorts of tasks. Take the weaver bird and put it in an environment where there are no long grasses. The weaver bird is gone within one generation. It cannot adapt. Transplant a human to a new environment and we learn how to get by. So modeling builds schemata being multiple for schema. And it builds individual behaviors. Monkey see, monkey do. You learn how to do a specific task or how to fulfill a particular role in society. The Bobo doll thing, you saw this in Psych 1 probably. It's the inflatable plastic clown. You're supposed to hit it. And the kids who see the model abuse the clown, they learn not only how to abuse the clown, but that clown is worthy of abusing. And then they improvise and escalate their aggression and even violence towards that clown. Okay, so you've learned not only the individual behaviors, but the schema. This doll is where we vent our frustrations and aggressions. This doll soaks our abuse. Punishment. If you've known me for more than 5 minutes, you've heard the spiel that punishment is not an effective means of behavior modification. I'm not going to repeat all of that now. But the death penalty in particular, let's have a look at that, because that's a broad sociological event or policy. There's absolutely no evidence that the death penalty reduces rates of violent crime. There's no convincing or persuasive or scientifically rigorous information to that effect. All right, the more we have death penalties, violent crime just doesn't change. Most crime is impulsive, and most violent crime is impulsive. There are a few incidents of meditative, planned in advance homicide, but almost all homicide is impulsive homicide. So people doing these crimes of passion just aren't thinking about, well, 15 years from now, after I've exhausted all my appeals, I could get the death penalty. The limbic system's in charge. The frontal lobe is not even there contemplating things like the future. And remember that almost all of your actions are driven by lower parts of the brain, and your values don't really matter that much to your behavior. You can make them matter. You can practice over and over again doing the right thing. You can practice putting some distance between the stimulus and the response and take time and think about it. You can become more thoughtful, but frankly, that takes a lot of energy, and the chances are you haven't done any of that yet. And then even for the planful sorts of crimes, people think they're special. People think they're immortal and that they won't get caught, or if they do get caught, there will be a lawyer there to protect them. They won't kill me. It's unimaginable. So the death penalty just isn't front of mind for people when they're enacting violent crimes. It's not a deterrent. It doesn't deter anything. There's no evidence that the death penalty reduces rates of violent crime, but there is some evidence that it increases rates of violent crime in the short term, local to the execution. So in this town, we're putting someone to death tonight. It's reported in the newspaper. Tomorrow, there will be a spike in violent crime. The state has shown contempt for human life, and the populace follows suit. So punishment, it often gets you compliance. Like right away, the organism does what you want it to do or doesn't do what you don't want it to do, more commonly. But the second it's out from under your thumb, the second you're not supervising it anymore, has no internal reasons to change its behavior. It just does the behavior looking over its shoulder to make sure you're not there. Okay? Punishment doesn't change behavior in the long term. Okay. What about violent video games? I have the most objection to this topic when we're talking mass shootings. Diverting attention to video games when someone goes to a public place with an AR-15 and shoots a bunch of people, that diverting attention is just that. It's a distraction. There are much more central issues we could be talking about, but instead we're having a stupid argument about video games. So do violent video games in particular, increase rates of aggression? Yeah, sure. Absolutely. In the short term. That is, if you make someone play violent video games for an hour and a half, and then you give them the chance to give electric shocks to somebody else, they're more likely to do it. Does that translate to anything in the broader social context? That's a much more challenging thing to prove. And does it lead to violence, right? Which is the extreme physical harm that's intentional. Does playing violent video games lead you there in a direct cause and effect? That's much, much muddier. That's really hard to prove. But in the short term, I mean, just leave some teenage boys watching WWE on Monday night while you go down to the liquor store for your bottle of Mad Dog or something, right? What's the order of the house going to be like when you get back? Someone has thrown someone else into a glass coffee table, and someone needs stitches, and the table needs replacing. There's going to be some cleanup, right? Because monkey see, monkey do. But did they mean to hurt each other? No. So video games and violence. Do violent video games cause mass shootings? No. It's just really hard to link violence in video games and movies and television to specific incidents of violence. There's so much more going on there. And another day, I'll tell you a lot about what that is, but not today. So I just want to give you this stuff. In sum, we probably don't learn to be violent, okay? Violence is innate to humans. Aggression is innate to humans. It's in your limbic system already. You're born that way. But you probably learn when it's appropriate to be violent and how to enact that violence. So those teenage boys, were they always going to wrestle and assert dominance and so forth? Yeah, probably. Maybe a little less, but they probably were always going to do that. But they watched wrestlers pick each other up and do various spins and drops and crap, and they wanted to try it out. And so they learned when and how to enact that violence. So do you have like 40 hours of free time on your hands? I really recommend this series of lectures from Robert Sapolsky. He integrates psychology and anthropology in some really fascinating ways. He's done all of the digging and all of the legwork. So we're going to spend like, I don't know, 2.5 hours on aggression over the course of a couple of lectures. He's spending more like 4.5 hours and coming from a different perspective, a non-sociology perspective. So the first lecture, it starts with, actually this is lecture number 17 in the series, but the first of the lectures on aggression. It's wrapping up human sexuality. That's worth watching too, if you have the time. And the last half of it is about human aggression. And then each of these are human aggression. They're like 75 minutes apiece, so 3.5 lectures, give or take. What's that? It's like 5 hours of stuff. So I'll probably use this video forever for people who miss a class or something, or if we keep doing online. But just know that the context of filming it is, for people in the future, is that we're all on sort of coronavirus lockdown, if you like, minimal interaction and activity, so we're onlining it. So if coronavirus has you down right now, people in the present, and you've already binge watched like all 6 seasons of Dexter and caught up on your crafting backlist and crap, need something to do, check these out. So when I make this statement, in some we probably don't learn to be violent. We don't need to. We probably learn how and when to be violent. That's derived from all of this lecture material in the integration of the biopsychosocial factors. Bob Sapolsky does a wonderful job of it, way in excess of anything that we've talked about so far. Okay. Why would it be that viewing violence causes people to be more aggressive, if not necessarily more violence? Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff here. One's going to be the availability heuristic. So what is top of mind for you? What are you know, what ideas do you have immediate access to? If we keep reminding you that violence is an option, then when you're going down your list of options for a solution to a problem, you know, violence is always on that list. If we don't keep reminding you of that, then it's not on your list. And absolutely, we could make television shows that show lots of different ways to solve various kinds of problems. And then when people have a choice of behaviors, those things are at the top of the list. And maybe they hadn't thought about them before. Okay? So violence is always a possibility. Aggression is always a possibility. We keep reminding you about it and keeping it top of mind. Priming. So priming is kind of leading you down a cognitive pathway, a cognitive garden path, if you like, and then leading you to give the answer that I want, really. So for example, please spell the word beach. Fabulous. Please spell the word deck chair. Ocean. Boat. Sunshine. Please spell the word sail. That's right. How many people spelled sail S-A-I-L instead of S-A-L-E? Absolutely. S-A-L-E could be the right answer, but I've led you to words about the ocean and the seaside. And it would be weird, actually, if the answer was S-A-L-E instead of S-A-I-L in that particular context, and that's priming. Priming is activating certain neural networks or parts of your brain to be more active so that when you're looking for an answer, right, you're going to draw it from that part of the brain instead of this part of the brain where there are different answers available to the question. Darren Brown, he's a British magician and something of a mentalist. So here's a little bit. It's about subliminal advertising, and he basically primes 2 ad execs to create a picture that he already created. And he does it through priming. He's activating parts of their brain, feeding them images that they don't know they're being fed, and then later on they regurgitate those images and say that they're their own idea. Okay? Priming is very, very powerful. So what else is happening? Aggression activates the limbic system. Watching people smash each other with folding chairs and throw each other around the ring in the wrestling match and stuff, it gets your limbic system going. You have empathy, and so you feel for one or the other of those people, and it's dumping adrenaline into your system. It's already starting to overload the frontal lobe inhibition, saying, you know, that's not a good thing to do. It's making your decisions more emotional, more fear-based, and less based on reason. Let's put all this together. So we're going to have a table, 2 chairs, 2 electric shock setups, and maybe a game we're playing. And the 2 research participants, they can push a button and give the other person an electric shock if they don't like the way that they're playing the game, if they make a move that they don't like. Okay? And we're going to play the game in 2 conditions. Different students in all the conditions. We're going to do it hundreds of times, not twice. But condition 1, that's everything that's in the room. In condition 2, there's a deactivated shotgun on the wall. Did I say rifle? It doesn't matter. Rifle, shotgun, it's all good. On the wall, and they can both see it from where they are, but it's not in there, right? It's not in their direct line of sight. It's just there. They can't take it down. It's present. And as it says in the notes, the students playing the game in the condition with the weapon in the room give each other more electric shocks than students in the room without the weapon on the wall. And why? All of this stuff. It works the availability heuristic. They know that violence is an option. It's right there, top of mind. And it's priming them, right? We're thinking about violence and shooting at people, and here's this tool. And the presence of a weapon. You might not notice it, but the presence of a weapon, your limbic system notices. It puts you on guard, and it makes you ready to respond to aggression with aggression. And even to preempt, okay? To get your revenge in first. So in the room with the rifle or the shotgun on the wall or whatever, students aggress more towards each other. And then desensitization in media, that's also a thing. If you work on a farm, if you work with livestock, then your values are probably different than someone who lives in a city and has like an office job, okay? Because on the farm, you have to hurt animals. That's your livelihood. You must do it. You have to like castrate the sheep, and you have to slaughter the pigs sometimes, and you have to hold the sheep still so that you can shear them and take their wool, and you have to break horses and chop the heads off chicken, dip them in hot water and pull their feathers out. Whereas the city folk, you don't see all of the violence that has led to the creation of your food products. You just go to the restaurant and order the steak, and you jokingly order it bloody, hamburger on the hoof. You have no direct experience, though, of the violence we have to enact against those cows to get that meat from the cows. The person on the farm, though, has become desensitized. They've seen blood and brains and guts and heard the screams of animals in fear and pain, and they've just learned to work through it and get past it. Does that have consequences? Yeah, it has consequences for us. As a society, it does. People who don't witness violence every day put a higher value on life and a higher value on human life than those that do witness and enact violence every day. And that's present in our voting behavior. It's present in our support for public policies and who we think is worthy of help and who is not. Rates of violence, we can track people's ancestry, and we can find out if their ancestors, relatively recent ancestors in the last 200 or 300 years, we can find out if they come from people who farmed crops or farmed animals. And people whose immediate ancestors worked with livestock are more prone to violence and aggression than people whose immediate ancestors farmed grain. And that's not genetic. That is in cultural evolution, in the mores, in the values your parents teach you. So that's out there too. You can become desensitized to violence, not notice how much violence is taking place, not notice when your aggression is causing discomfort. Like a big example of this in the modern world is The Walking Dead zombie show. If you haven't seen it, I mean, just turn off the lecture now. I guess we're done. But you can watch the level of violence in The Walking Dead escalate over the course of the show. So in season 1, just seeing a dead person walking down the road was enough to disgust and dismay most people. And then by season 3, we had to have human violence in order to get that effect. And by season 5, you have to have Negan smearing someone's head across the pavement into brain jelly with a baseball bat in order to disgust and dismay people. So season over season, the show has to do more to shock you because you've just become inured to the violence. You've become desensitized to blood and guts and brains and human suffering. So there's that. Good. So we're done with this part, and I'll be back in another lecture here pretty soon. All right. Good luck out there.